I got initiated at Rath Yatra in 1972, and when we got back to Vedanta in 1973, somebody informed us that we were supposed to offer Guru Dakshin, and gradually I tried to figure out what they meant. What was Guru Dakshin? And it became clear that for Guru Dakshin one should go around and beg for some dakshin, some gift for the spiritual master. So I became very concerned, because I thought, in Lechmore Heath, if the devotees go around begging from door to door, it's not going to look very good, and it may not shed this movement in a very nice light. So I became very concerned about how to actually give some Guru Dakshin to Srila Prabhupada. So I asked Shrutikirti, who was Prabhupada's secretary, his servant, what to do. And he suggested, well, why don't you write a letter to Srila Prabhupada? So after a lot of soul searching, I finally worked out the words. I was sitting on the windowsill by the window in Prabhupada's balcony, and I wrote this letter to Srila Prabhupada as best I could, expressing my anxiety and my gratefulness to him for accepting me as his disciple. I gave the letter to Shrutikirti, and he took it in due course of his service to Srila Prabhupada, and I heard nothing more of it. But then I asked him later, did Prabhupada say anything when he read the letter? And Shrutikirti looked at me a little strangely, and he said his humility is his good qualification. So from that I could understand that Prabhupada, he could recognize even that I was a completely useless person. I couldn't even get a gift of Guru Dakshin for him. But somehow Prabhupada could take some teeny, insignificant quality and make it into something as an offering to him and Krishna. And that was something, a very personal thing that I don't normally tell people. Hare Krishna. But I thought, because it demonstrates Prabhupada's wonderful qualities, it should be said. And as we were walking through the village of Lechmore Heath, Prabhupada, he was talking about how there are so many luminaries in this world, but they can't give any real light, just like the glowworms. And then Prabhupada looked me right in the eye and said, one thing he said before that, he said, so even the Maharishi, he knows that if anyone is serious, he has to send them to us. His servant Aravinda, he has also come to us. So then Prabhupada, he said, looking me right in the eye, which was a real experience, he said, what is the use of so many stars when with one moon you can light up the whole night? And later I realized more and more, although at the time I realized that Prabhupada was actually looking right through me, and I was completely transparent to Srila Prabhupada. But I realized afterwards not only the fact that Prabhupada actually was that moon who was lighting up the night, but Prabhupada wanted all of us to become moons and not just stars. So that was a very special time. Another time on a morning walk in London, I'd been a little puzzled because when I joined the temple, I joined, or I thought I joined, with a friend of mine who was very eager. He seemed even more enthusiastic than me to join the temple. But I wound up moving in and he didn't. So I asked Prabhupada, why is it that when two people come to Krishna consciousness, that one person takes it up and the other one doesn't? And Prabhupada's reply was very interesting. He said, when someone is materially fatigued, he can take up Krishna consciousness. And then he said, so by the association of devotees, we become materially fatigued. So that was a very good experience. That just cleared all my doubts about that. Prabhupada's answer was so perfect. So in Nairobi, about, it was either 76 or 77, I think 76, Prabhupada had gone on a morning walk, and we went to this beautiful park in the early morning, and the birds were singing, the sun was shining. It was an incredibly transcendental atmosphere with the birds in the trees. And we went onto this bandstand in the middle of the park. There was nobody else around. And something very unusual happened, because usually we would expect that Prabhupada would say something to us. But this time he said, "So, talk among yourselves." Actually, he said, "Discuss among yourselves." So we all kind of wondered, what on earth do we say? Who do we say? Who do we say anything to? And I remember Chayavana Swami, he came up with the idea, he said, "Aham sarvasya prabhava," that Krishna is the source of all the material and spiritual worlds. And Prabhupada stopped him. He said, "Forget scripture. What is the argument?" And we were trying to understand what he meant. Of course, it was always very interesting on morning walks because we'd always learn so much. So then Prabhupada explained something which stuck with me for all these years. Prabhupada explained that when someone is asleep, automatically some salty water comes from the body, maybe a little 1 or 2 ounces of salty water from our bodies. But then from Krishna's body, his body is so great, he can produce a whole ocean of salty water. So this was quite a revelation. And I remember Harikesh was with us, who would usually take the devil's advocate role and argue with Prabhupada, which mostly we found quite shocking. But he said, "But first you have to drink water before you can perspire." And so Prabhupada, he looked to one Dr. Shah who was there and said, "Is that right?" And Dr. Shah said, "No." So Prabhupada said, "Just see." And then Prabhupada went on to explain, so just like water is coming from the body, similarly from our bodies we also produce some liquids and some gases and some solids. So in the same way, the gases, liquids and solids, they're all coming from Krishna's body. So from this it became very clear, Prabhupada wanted us to have very practical, reasonable arguments that we could convince everyone that not only the living beings come from the living beings, but also that matter comes from the living being. I thought it was such a fantastic argument, and I still use that in schools to school children today. Hare Krishna. So one time in a Srimad Bhagavatam class at Bhaktivedanta Mana, I was sitting near the front of the Vyasasana, and Prabhupada was sitting up, raised on this Vyasasana. And during the class, one of those wonderful ISKCON microphone stands started doing its thing and gradually slipping down from Prabhupada's mouth. So I looked around and nobody else was getting up to do anything, so I thought, okay, let me get up and do something. And I went up and tried to adjust it and tighten it up. And Prabhupada, he just carried on lecturing while I was doing that, and I just went and sat down again. And then after a few moments, it started slipping down again. So I looked at Prabhupada and thought, okay, I've got to try and sort this time and really tighten it. So I got up again and tried to adjust it and tightened it as much as I could without breaking it, and then sat down again quietly. And then after a few moments, it started slipping down again. And Prabhupada looked at me and he shouted at me. He said, "Fix it today!" So unfortunately, the crack in the tiles in the temple room wasn't big enough for me to crawl in between. But I was very shocked and disturbed by the experience, and I was trying to decide how could I do that, because I had no resources and no facility, and I wasn't the most intelligent person to make it happen. But somehow or other, someone did fix it eventually. But it also made me realize that getting the things done was not just somebody else's responsibility. It was all of us' responsibility. And getting it done and doing it, just doing it, was absolutely important for all of us. We can't wait for somebody else to take care of preaching or anything else. I'd been reading somewhat from the books and realized how Prabhupada had quoted Chanakya Pandit many times. And on the morning walk sometimes in London in the park, Prabhupada would sometimes quote Chanakya. And I asked Prabhupada, are these instructions from Chanakya Pandit spiritual instructions? And Prabhupada looked quizzically and said, no, they're moral instructions. Which was a very big eye-opener, because on reflection it became very clear that Prabhupada had to teach us a whole lot about morality as well as spiritual life. So that was a big learning curve, always with Srila Prabhupada. It was such a nice learning curve. In 1977, early in the year, around Gaur Purnima time, the devotees came to Bombay and Prabhupada came there. And Prabhupada was really not well at all. It was a very difficult time. I remember he wanted to stay in his rooms, but the devotees said that his rooms are not ready. And Prabhupada replied, if they're not ready now, they'll never be ready. So they pulled out all the stops, they put out carpets and probably covered up all the bits of concrete and metal sticking out the walls, and they carried Prabhupada up and down on his palanquin. And Prabhupada came down onto it was like a platform. That was all there was of the temple, really, at that time. And Prabhupada sat there, and we all sat below the platform, and we had Guru Puja for Srila Prabhupada. Now, after the Guru Puja, Prabhupada, we sing the song, Shri Guru Charana Padma, and it's always a nice meditation on the words. But Prabhupada asked, what is the gift of the spiritual master? And I remember I tried to answer something. I don't remember exactly what I said, but what Prabhupada said was very interesting. He said it is Dibya-gyan. He said that it is transcendental knowledge. Don't think that what the spiritual master is giving you is material knowledge. He's giving you transcendental knowledge. And then he said, if you always remember this, you will always be able to feel obliged to your spiritual master. And that's something which has stayed with me all these years, very much how to feel obliged to Prabhupada and try to discharge that obligation to him. Well, there's one thing that really struck me, and this happened after Prabhupada had left. And I was sitting in Vishnumurti's Bhaktivedanta Archives office near Watford one time. And I happened to be listening to a tape that was playing there. And I heard this really extraordinary thing that just I'd never really come across in the course of ordinary dealings with the mass of devotees, because I never really had any one-to-one time with Prabhupada. But Prabhupada was having a discussion clearly with some devotees, and one devotee was talking about Shamsundar Prabhu, who was our former GBC and who was Prabhupada's secretary for a long time. And he'd mentioned that, oh, Shamsundar's doing this and doing that and doing the other, and it was a bit disappointing to hear what had happened to him. But then Prabhupada said, actually, he was the best servant I ever had. And that genuine appreciation from Srila Prabhupada just really struck me, that Prabhupada really had so much affection for his devotees. And that was something that in all the years in ISKCON, it was almost something that had been lost in the translation of what we'd learn. But then hearing that from Prabhupada made a huge impact on me, that Prabhupada had so much genuine caring and love and warmth for the devotees, and real compassion, and that would hopefully be our ticket back home.
Karuna Prachu